You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Tonight, our cover story is about the Russia-Ukraine war. The conflict has dragged on for over a year, and tonight we tell you about the conflict reaching a very critical juncture. In focus is Bakhmut in Ukraine. It is a significant part, both strategically as well as symbolically. And we tell you why the claims and counterclaims over Bakhmut are a defining point as far as this war is concerned. We also tell you how Russia is now deploying its most deadly weapons as it strikes the Ukrainian capital with a hypersonic missile. Also on the show for you tonight, who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? We tell you more about the sabotage that sent shock waves around the world after fingers are being pointed at a pro-Ukrainian group. It's a major boost for brand India. Apple is now reshuffling its top management with a focus on India. We tell you what that is all about. Also coming up for you, a former Pakistan spy chief is now under the scanner. He is being investigated for alleged corruption. We get you the complete story along with the heated war of words triggered by the developments in the country. What time is it on the moon? You heard me right. The moon could soon get its own time zone. We tell you what's brewing as the space race heats up. Also coming up, scientists have created motherless mice in a major breakthrough that could change the way we look at human reproduction. Will motherless humans be next? We tell you. The Ukraine war has reached yet another do-or-die stage. The fall of Bakhmut could change the script, revitalize the stalled Russian offensive, and deliver what Moscow hopes will be a knockout blow. Russia is deploying its most deadly weapons. The deadliest is the hypersonic missile. Next generation arms are now being used. Earlier today, Kiev was hit by hypersonic missiles. Not one, not two, but at least 6 of them. The missile attacks took place across a period of almost 7 hours. The missiles also hit Kharkiv and Odessa. At least 9 people lost their lives. Now, this is the first time Russia has used so many of these hypersonic missiles in Ukraine. They are called daggers, hyper-lethal daggers. And what do we know about them? They can travel at an astonishing 8,000 miles per hour. I'm talking about 10 times the speed of sound. These missiles are normally carried by MiG-31K fighters, and they can hit targets as far away as 1,250 miles. In fact, these missiles are hard to track using on-ground radar, and that is partly because of their exceptionally high speeds. Ukraine does not have the capability to intercept these missiles. And you know what? They can carry nuclear warheads. Russia has previously admitted firing these missiles into Ukraine, but the numbers have gone up. And not everybody is surprised. Let me answer that with a question. Your opposition becomes powerful, your army loses the upper hand, and your people become more vulnerable. Ukraine never really had the claim to an upper hand in the war. But Ukraine's strongholds are crumbling now. Its fortress city, Bakhmut, appears to be falling. This is not my assessment. Why don't you listen in to the NATO's Secretary General, who is Ukraine's closest ally?
We can not rule out that Bakhmut may eventually fall in the coming days.
Has this emboldened Russia? After all, the fall of Bakhmut is expected to trigger a domino effect, and no one knows this better than Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. In fact, Zelensky was recently speaking to an American media outlet. He said, and I'm quoting, "We understand that after Bakhmut, they could go further. They could go to Kramatorsk. They could go to Sloviansk. It would open the road for the Russians after Bakhmut to other towns in Ukraine in the Donetsk direction." And Zelensky's assessment is bang on. Let's just mark it out on a map. The places he just mentioned. And this is where Bakhmut is located, a city of immense strategic importance. The control of Bakhmut gives Russia the road to foray into the entire region. After Bakhmut, can Kiev be far behind? The road, as Zelensky says, will open up. And it is a rather uncomfortable question, one that the West will try to dodge at all counts. Why don't we play out Stoltenberg's remaining soundbite?
We can not rule out that Bakhmut may eventually fall in the coming days. And therefore, it is also important to highlight that this does not necessarily reflect any turning point of the war, and it just highlights that we should not underestimate Russia.
Well, too late, I would say, because the Russian private army, the Wagner Group, already claims control of eastern Bakhmut. If Wagner is to be believed, a part of the fort is already in Russia's control.
Wagner Group regiments have taken the whole of eastern Bakhmut. Everything east of Bakhmutka river is fully controlled by Wagner Group. This can be reported.
But you see, Ukraine is clinging on to the rest. The battle for Bakhmut has been going on for 7 months now. This is an industrial town with salt factories and a population of around 70,000 people. Today, Bakhmut looks nothing like it used to. Today, it is a ghost town. And those who have stayed back are living in underground shelters. Zelensky says Ukraine will fight till the end to keep Bakhmut.
Bakhmut direction, the situation is constantly becoming more difficult. The enemy is constantly destroying everything that can be used to protect our positions. For fortification and defense, our soldiers defending in the Bakhmut direction are real heroes.
Now, could this have a connect to the hypersonic missile strikes? Some analysts believe Russia dipping into its stock of next-gen weapons is a sign of desperation. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, could be using hypersonic missiles to terrorize the population and to force Ukraine to withdraw troops from Bakhmut. In fact, yesterday, Ukraine's army commander of the ground forces visited Bakhmut. He awarded military honors to the soldiers for holding the fort.
All enemies will be destroyed and the victory will be achieved. Glory to you and to Bakhmut. Because you are now in the hottest spot. There is no hotter site today than Bakhmut Fortress. That's why I will award you today. We will award you crosses for bravery, courage and heroism.
The battle for Bakhmut is not over, and what happens next could change the fate of this war. In the meanwhile, the use of next-gen arms could become the new normal, paving the way for weapons even more deadly. You see, that is the logic of war. Deaths multiplied. And as the battle for Bakhmut rages, a question is buzzing across Europe. A question that concerns the continent's energy security. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines? Was it the Russians or the Americans? This has been an ongoing debate for quite some time now. We have been telling you about this. Both the sides accusing each other of sabotage. Washington saying the Russians did it. Moscow says the Americans did it. 5 months and countless probes later, the mystery remains unresolved. And now a new report has surfaced. It has added another twist to this saga. It says the pipelines were damaged by a pro-Ukrainian group. A pro-Ukrainian group. This assessment is based on intelligence received by US officials. And what is the source of this intelligence? And which group does it really refer to? This the Americans did not answer. All they say is that the perpetrators were opponents of the Russian president. I'll get there in a bit. First, let me show you what I'm talking about. This pair of underwater gas pipelines. They run under the Baltic Sea, connecting Russia to Germany. These are the Nord Stream pipelines. In September last year, they were damaged in a mysterious explosion. The blast released vast quantities of gas into the Baltic Sea and rendered 3 of the 4 lines inoperable. And 5 months on, the Nord Stream project has, in a sense, come to a standstill as the blame game continues. Now, American officials have intensified it further with the help of some media networks in Europe. Let me break down their claims for you. They are based on what US officials are saying and some reports published in the German media. To start with, the intel says that the perpetrators were probably Ukrainian or Russian nationals. It further adds that none of them were from the United States or Britain. The group was apparently made up of 5 men and a woman. They were using professionally falsified passports and other documents. German officials have identified the yacht suspected to have been used in the attack, and this yacht was apparently rented out by a company based in Poland. The group launched their operation from the North German port of Rostock. They then returned the vessel back to its owner uncleaned. Because of this, the investigators were able to find traces of explosives inside it. Let me repeat here. These are claims made by US officials and some German media organizations. So you've got to view them with caution. For all you know, America could be trying to shift blame for its own wrongdoing. Again, I am not the one saying this. Western media reports are. Some of you may remember this one. It was released by Seymour Hersh, a Pulitzer Prize-winning American journalist. In this report, Hersh claimed that America hatched the plot to bomb the energy pipelines. He said the entire operation was led by Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor. Besides him, there were also officials from the CIA, US State Department officials, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was a highly secretive mission. The US refuted these allegations, but its response right after the blast only adds to our doubts about its role. And I say this because the US reaction was celebratory. Here's what the US State Secretary Antony Blinken had said back then. Let me quote, "It is a tremendous opportunity to once and for all remove the dependence on Russian energy, and thus to take away from Vladimir Putin the weaponization of energy as a means of advancing his imperial designs." Why would he say such a thing? Why would he celebrate the destruction of Europe's lifeline? Did Blinken indirectly confess to America's role in this sabotage? Well, it only gets murkier the deeper you dig. And now all of a sudden, America tries to shift the blame to Ukraine itself, but offers no firm conclusions about its claims. What does Kiev have to say about this? Has it responded to this assessment made by its ally? Yes, it has. Have a look at this tweet. It's from Mikhailo Podolak. He is Ukraine's presidential advisor. He has called the report an amusing conspiracy theory, strongly rejecting the claim that Ukraine had anything to do with it. Even the chief of NATO has echoed these remarks, saying it would be wrong to speculate anything in this case before the investigation is completed. And besides them, authorities in Germany, Sweden and Denmark have also made similar statements. They say they will not comment until the ongoing investigations are concluded. Why then is America in such a hurry? Why are American officials so worried? And if they are making such wild allegations, why can't they offer evidence to back them up? Like, who is providing them with such intel? Which group was behind the sabotage? What were their intentions? Who were they working for? These are questions America must answer the next time it decides to pass the blame on to others. On to some good news for India's tech industry. Apple plans to focus more on India. It has decided to redesignate the country as an individual market. And what does that mean? Let me break it down. According to a report by Bloomberg, India is becoming its own sales region at Apple. Earlier, it was clubbed with West Asia, Mediterranean, East Europe and Africa. This spells good news for India. It's a first such change for the country in Apple's hierarchy. And why not? After all, India has emerged as a really bright spot for Apple. The tech giant reported record revenue last quarter. Let's look at some figures here. In the financial year 2021 to 22, its country revenue rose 45% to nearly $4.69 billion. Its net profit rose 3% to around $150 million. On top of the Indian club, Apple breaks out 4 other regions. They are the Americas, Greater China, Japan, and the rest of Asia Pacific. And this is how Apple's revenue breakup looked like last fiscal year. The company generated $169.7 billion in Americas, $95.1 billion in India, West Asia, Mediterranean, East Europe, and Africa, $74.2 billion in Greater China, $26 billion in Japan, and $29.4 billion in the rest of Asia Pacific. You see, Apple executives have been impressed with India's performance. They have lauded India's double-digit year-over-year growth. Demand for Apple products surged. Now the company plans to reshuffle the global management teams. Hugo S. Asaman, the vice president in charge of the Indian region, recently retired. His shoes will be filled by Ashish Chaudhary, the head of India. After promotion, Chaudhary will report directly to Apple's head of product sales, Michael Finger. Let's look at Apple's hierarchy for more clarity here. Apple's sales and international teams are split between Vice President Finger and another Vice President, Doug Beck. Finger oversees hardware, services and enterprise sales globally, while Beck is in charge of the health, education and government segments. Both the executives report to Chief Tim Cook. But recently, there has been a surge in executives leaving Apple, Asaman's departure being the latest. Vice President in charge of subscription services stepped down earlier this year. The cloud chief planning to leave next month. Last year, top executives in charge of industrial design, procurement, parts of software and hardware engineering, privacy, information systems, and the online store all announced their exits. Apart from being a sales engine for Apple, India is also becoming vital to the company's product development. Key suppliers are relocating to the region. Hon Hai Precision Industry Company, also known as Foxconn, is a key example. It is a major manufacturer of iPhone components. Foxconn will reportedly invest around $700 million It plans to build a new 300-acre plant in India's tech hub, Bengaluru. This comes as Apple suppliers race to exit China. The investment is one of Foxconn's biggest single outlays in India to date. And will this put China at risk? Could China lose its status as the world's largest producer of consumer electronics? Apple chief Tim Cook compared Apple's performance in India to its early years in China. In fact, China currently generates roughly $75 billion annually for Apple. It is the company's biggest sales region after the Americas and Europe. In January, India cleared more than a dozen of Apple's Chinese suppliers to expand in the country. The government made it abundantly clear. The Chinese firms would not be allowed to set up completely owned entities. They will have to form joint ventures with the Indian companies to set up their facilities. And this could boost India's local value addition in iPhone manufacturing. It is a measure of enhancing an imported goods value. According to experts, it is currently around 18% for iPhones in India. But with the partners coming in, it could likely go up to 50%. Meanwhile, a landmark defense agreement is on the cards. As per an exclusive by Reuters, Australia plans to buy up to 5 US Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarines. Under the AUKUS Pact, at least one of them will visit Australian ports in the coming years. The rest are expected in the 2030s. The question is this deal a snub to the UK? Because Australia was expected to buy British Astute-class submarines, and now it has gone forward with the American rivals. Let me first tell you more about the Virginia-class submarines. They are advanced stealth multi-mission models. They are designed for deep ocean anti-submarine warfare. They can also carry out shallow water operations. The submarines are fitted with 12 vertical launch system tubes. They can launch 16 Tomahawk cruise missiles. These missiles have a range of 1,700 kilometers. But most importantly, they can carry nuclear-armed cruise missiles, which means the conventionally armed boats now have a nuclear deterrence role. They can be used for special operations and intelligence gathering. It is the first US submarine to employ a built-in Navy SEAL staging area, which means a team of 9 men can enter and leave the submarine at one time. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is due to meet the US President Joe Biden and the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. This meeting will be taking place in San Diego on Monday. The leaders are expected to reveal AUKUS's next steps. But what is interesting is the timing of this meeting. Albanese is currently on a 4-day trip to India. This is his first visit to the Quad partner in his current role. Earlier today, he attended a cricket test match between Australia and India with Narendra Modi. He also participated in the Holi celebrations. Listen in to what he had to say.
Whatever the future holds, I know that Australia's Indian origin community is and will continue to be a crucial partner in the way that our two countries can move forward together. Move forward together with stronger economic ties. Move forward with stronger cultural ties. Move forward together with our common need for security in the Indo-Pacific region.
But what really does Albanese's trip to India really mean? Is it simply a consolation for the upcoming AUKUS meeting? You see, India, Australia and the US are Quad partners. While Quad is not a military partnership, it is seen as a bloc to counter Chinese hostilities. But in 2021, Australia and the US went ahead and formed AUKUS. And now an AUKUS meet is on the cards. Albanese is in India just ahead of the meeting. Is Australia trying to be on India's good side before it signs up for American submarines? Is the cause relevance under question? And what about Australia's AUKUS partner, the UK? Both American and British nuclear-powered submarines were on the table. Australia seems to have taken its pick, but reports say it is expected to strike a deal with the UK, that the US submarines are simply a stopgap, that Australia and the UK are actually designing next-generation submarines from the existing Astute-class vessel. However, they face two hurdles, number one being the expected delivery time. The British submarines will not be ready till the 2040s. Number two being quality. Have a look at this article from The Times. It highlights former Minister of Defence Peter Dutton's claims. Dutton said that the Astute design had faults and the project would likely run over its budget. He also said that it was obvious that the US submarines were a better choice. Just how accurate were Dutton's claims? Not much, according to Downing Street. The UK Prime Minister's office asserted that British submarines are the world's finest. So how will it react to the US getting the first order? And what does this mean for AUKUS? Next week's meeting will provide more clarity, perhaps. Our next story is from Pakistan, and it concerns Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, the former chief of Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI. Is he about to get court-martialed? I ask this question because the Pakistan government is tightening the noose around him, probing his actions as the spy chief. I'll begin with this report. PMLN's senior vice president, Maryam Nawaz, has called for the court-martial of Faiz Hamid, accusing him of conspiring to topple her father's government and backing Imran Khan's government for 4 years. She said this in an interview to a Pakistani news channel. Let me quote, "I knocked on the court's door against General Faiz Hamid when he was the head of the ISI. I submitted the entire evidence along with the petition in the court. The major evidence was the former general's visit to the house of Islamabad High Court's former judge, Shaukat Aziz, and asked him to punish Nawaz Sharif and Maryam Nawaz and not approve their bail." And immediately after these remarks, another statement was issued, this time by Rana Sanola, the Interior Minister of Pakistan. At a recent press conference, he apparently told reporters that a probe was underway against the former ISI boss and his brother over alleged corruption. Sanola mentioned only the brother, but Dawn says that even Faiz Hamid is being probed. So what sort of corruption was he talking about? Well, besides trying to influence the judges, they have also been accused of accumulating assets beyond means. And this has triggered a huge debate. Opponents of the current government saying that such probes into assets are the domain of the FIA, the Federal Investigation Agency of Pakistan. Rana Sanola does not agree. As for the court-martial, it is the domain of the general headquarters of the Pakistan Army. It does not even fall within the jurisdiction of the civil authorities. So how can a political leader get a former army official court-martialed? Well, the Interior Minister says politicians are free to express their point of view and leave it to the army to decide. Now remember, Faiz Hamid was said to be close to Imran Khan. In fact, there was a time when Imran Khan fought to make him stay on the post of the ISI chief. So in a way, the PMLN is trying to target Imran Khan by getting Faiz Hamid in the dock. The question is, what is Imran Khan doing about all of this? Well, he too is seeking a court-martial, not of Faiz Hamid, but of Qamar Bajwa, the former army chief of Pakistan. In a recent interview, he called for an internal military inquiry against Bajwa for his alleged admission about being involved in the PTI government's ouster. Let me quote his exact statement. The PMLN, PDM and the establishment are all standing on one side. They altogether removed our government, and General Bajwa has admitted to the regime change since he has given his statement to a journalist about for what reasons the government was removed. And what exactly was he talking about? General Bajwa's remarks in a recent column where he apparently called the PTI dangerous for Pakistan. Imran Khan says this is an admission of culpability. And this is why he is pushing for an inquiry against Bajwa. So at the end of the day, it has become a battle of court-martial versus court-martial. On one hand, you have Maryam Nawaz pushing for a court-martial of Faiz Hamid, a friend of Imran Khan. On the other, you have Imran Khan pushing for the court-martial of General Bajwa, a man he says helped the PMLN. My question is, do they have nothing else to worry about? Pakistan's economy is on the deathbed. The people do not have money to buy food. But the politicians are busy settling political scores. We can only sympathize with the people of Pakistan. Shifting focus for now, protests continue in the capital of Georgia for the second straight day. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets against the controversial Foreign Agents Law. Holding EU and Georgian flags, demonstrators gathered in front of the parliament, which has approved the draft law on foreign agents. Protesters say the draft law is reminiscent of Russian legislation used to silence the critics. There was violence and arson on the streets of the capital. The police had to use water cannon and tear gas to disperse the demonstrators around the parliament building. Police and protesters clashed. Over 70 demonstrators have now been detained. Our next report getting you the complete story.
For the second straight day, thousands of people staged large-scale protests in Tbilisi, Georgia on Wednesday. Some protests were violent. They're rallying against pending legislation dubbed the Foreign Agents Law, which critics say signals an authoritarian shift that harms Georgia's chances of closer ties with Europe. Georgia's parliament on Tuesday passed a first reading of the legislation. It requires any organisations receiving more than 20% of their funding from overseas to register as foreign agents or face substantial fines. The ruling Georgian Dream Party says it's modelled on US legislation dating back from the 1930s. Critics say it's reminiscent of a Russian law that the Kremlin has used to crack down on dissent.
We're protesting the Russian law. I call it Russian law. I cannot call it anything else because it's completely Russian law controlled and imposed upon us by Russia.
Now we are protesting against the Russian law that the Georgian government is trying to take and bring in the country. We are here and we're ready to fight.
In clashes on Tuesday evening, protesters threw Molotov cocktails and stones at police, who used tear gas and water cannon to dispel the crowds. The Interior Ministry said 66 people had been detained. Protests continued on Wednesday afternoon with a march to mark International Women's Day, which is a public holiday in Georgia. Opposition parties called for a second night of mass protests outside Parliament. The issue has deepened a rift between Georgian Dream, which leads the government and has a majority in Parliament, and the country's president, Salome Zurabichvili, a pro-European who's moved away from the party since being elected with its support in 2018. She's backed the protesters, saying on Tuesday that lawmakers who voted for the draft law had violated the constitution.
Let me now ask you a question. What time is it on the moon? Have you ever imagined a clock on the big white satellite? Well, space agencies are working to make that dream come true. With tons of lunar missions headed for the launch pad, scientists will soon create a lunar time zone, or what we can call moon time. What is this all about? Our next report tells you.
Space age. Lunar missions have operated as per Earth's time zone. Well, because that's the only one that exists. But with several lunar explorations heading to the moon, space agencies have deemed the current time system unsustainable. Why is that? The answer, in one word, is coordination. With several lunar missions heading out from different countries, it is crucial to maintain streamlined contact among different nations. That is why agencies have called for a universal timekeeping system, which will also make it easier for public and private entities to coordinate trips to and around the moon. You see, under the present system, the spacecraft operator's time is used by astronauts to determine what time it is. So, will time on the moon be synchronized with Earth's time? This is a tricky one, because time on Earth is tracked by atomic clocks, but clocks will run faster on the moon due to its weaker gravitational pull. Time will run 58 microseconds faster each day. Up until now, moon time is calculated on a timescale exported from Earth. Deep space antennas are used to keep chronometers synchronized with terrestrial time. Although having the same time as on Earth wouldn't be possible, scientists are working on a lunar time zone, which will suit the moon's atmosphere. So why is this even required? Just how much traffic is the moon expecting? Just to name a few, India is planning to launch the Chandrayaan-3 mission, which will carry a landing module and a robotic rover. Next comes Russia, which plans to launch a mission that plans to put a probe and gather samples from the moon's southern polar region. Joining the league is US SpaceX, which plans to take 9 passengers on the Dear Moon voyage. This will be the first mission for the Starship vehicle. News of the moon getting its own time zone comes at a time when the space race is only heating up, especially the race between Russia and the West. Russia has already threatened to end its space program cooperation with the West over sanctions imposed on Moscow. The US has also called space a war-fighting domain, as strains in the US-China relationship make potential conflict in space more probable. NASA has never given up on planning its lunar missions, so that it gets first dibs on the precious moon metals. But China continues to plan its own share of new missions amid the space race and the ongoing war in Ukraine.
3, 2, 1.
Companies such as SpaceX are relentlessly trying to give people a view of space. A live view of space. So, what time is it on the moon right now? We shall find out soon enough.
Let me now ask you, can you imagine babies being born without mothers? That might sound like a silly question. I mean, how is that even possible, you might wonder. Well, what I am about to say next sounds like the plot of a sci-fi movie, but it is playing out in real life. It is stranger than fiction, but it's for real. There has been a major breakthrough. Scientists have created mice with 2 fathers. You heard that right. They are motherless mice that have 2 fathers. How did that even happen? What does it mean? Let me just break it down for you one by one. First things first, this breakthrough was presented at a conference in London. Katsuhiko Hayashi from Kyushu University in Japan spoke about it at the 3rd International Summit on Human Genome Editing. It is a significant development because the earlier attempts have not been completely successful. You see, 5 years ago, 12 mouse pups were created after fertilizing eggs that were derived from male cells, but they could not breathe properly and they did not survive. But the mice created now by scientists are healthy. How exactly were they created? By converting male cells into eggs. Basically, a skin cell from a male mouse was reprogrammed to convert it into a stem cell. And as we learned in biology lessons back at school, male cells have XY chromosomes. Female eggs have XX chromosomes. But this breakthrough involved devising a method to do away with the Y chromosome and then replace it with an X chromosome so that it could become an egg. And this is a huge milestone. You know what this means? Let me just tell you about the possible implications. Gay men could have biological children in the future. Basically, babies related to both the parents. It also means that a kind of infertility in women could now be cured. The Turner syndrome, for example, it happens due to abnormalities related to chromosomes. And this breakthrough could change the way we look at human reproduction. Mice, as of now, and will humans be next, is the immediate question. After motherless mice, will we soon see motherless children? You see, human cells need more time to generate a mature egg, which also means that there is a greater risk of the cells having unwanted genetic changes. In fact, according to a report, Kazuhiko Hayashi has said that they now want to look into using this technique for human cells. But as of now, there are hurdles on that path, even if it was proved to be safe and was considered ethical when it comes to application in humans. Hayashi, in fact, said that this is not a question just for the scientific program, but also for the society. What do you think about this? Let us know. Let us now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
Massive protests in Israel against judicial reform plans as U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin lands in the country. Tel Aviv airport blocked off. City's junctions jammed by rallies. South Korea claims fresh short-range ballistic missile fired by North Korea towards the Yellow Sea. Kim Jong's sister had warned that any move to shoot down a North Korean missile would be considered a declaration of war. 37 fishermen killed as Boko Haram jihadists strike in North Nigeria. The killed fishermen were accused of spying for the country's military. French Senate votes to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64 as the government pushes ahead with pension reforms, despite massive protests by labor unions. At the iconic Louvre Museum, employees protest in front of Mona Lisa. 3 Palestinians shot dead by Israeli forces in West Bank city of Jenin. According to Palestinian Health Ministry, Israel's Security Minister Ben Gvir praises undercover officers for their action. Taliban governor of Afghanistan's Balkh province was killed in a blast at his office. Mohammad Dawood Muzamil is one of the highest-ranking Taliban officials to be killed in such circumstances since the group returned to power in August 2021. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin arrested after questioning on alleged abuse of power and money laundering. He is to be charged with corruption. A passenger train plows into a bus in Nigeria's Lagos City. At least 3 dead, many injured. Rescue operations underway. A passenger train plows into a bus in Nigeria's Lagos City. At least 3 dead, many injured. Rescue operations underway. Corinne Diacre has been sacked as manager of the French national women's team just 4 months before the World Cup. The 48-year-old departs after several key players, including Captain Wendy Renard, said they would no longer represent their country.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. We are leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
et au niveau de son nez. Parfait. Et là, tu maintiens bien comme ça Coco, il va respirer de l'air qui va l'endormir progressivement.
Je me présente, je suis Yelty, je suis docteur, je suis noxologue. Alors moi je te propose que du coup on va l'examiner, on va regarder, oui, on va écouter le poumon aussi.
Papa, maman, je comprends pas.